House District 86, House District 87. I want to thank you all for being here, and we appreciate you being here. How many people saw the ad in the paper? Okay, never mind. Okay, one person saw the ad. Excellent. Okay, so this is a town hall. They're going to give about 10-15-minute introduction, and then we're going to let y'all open it up for questions. We ask that you be respectful, raise your hands, and then they'll call on you as they go through the line. This is Joe.
They call me Joe.
And you're with what blog?
Politics.
Politics. It's a blog on Facebook
Yes.
called Politics. He's recording this so that he can post the full video online. And I think that's about it. If everybody would stand, Hollis is going to do the prayer for us.
Father God, we thank you for this day, this opportunity to come together with common cause, which is the good of our county, our state, and our nation. Lord, we lift up our president. We lift up all those people who are working to do good things according to your will in a government, large and small. We ask, Father God, that you be with us here today, that you would guide us in a spirit of civility and in a spirit of being informed and knowing that which is true. Help us, we ask, Father God, in the name of Jesus, as though we are one family. Amen.
Amen. And Fred, if you would lead us in the pledge.
I almost forgot the words, but I think
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm going to be ready to go, so I'm not don't pray like that.
Okay, I think I know all of you. I am Nancy Ballance, representing House District 87 for the last 4 terms, 8 years, which when I came in it was going to be 2 years, and it just kind of went one into the next, and before you know it, 8 years have gone by. So in appropriations the entire time, and my second term I chaired appropriations and have chaired it every session since. Also started out in the interim in the Revenue and Transportation Interim Committee, then moved to the Finance Committee, have been in the Finance Committee for the last 3 interims, including this current one. Clearly, my comments always lean toward the financial part of it. That's where my experience is, that's where my heart is, that's what I enjoy the most. So most of my comments will tie back to the budget in one way or another. I ran into someone at another meeting, and I can't remember who, as a matter of fact, who asked me, so what did you think about the session? Were you happy about the session? And once I reflected for a couple minutes on all of the craziness that's still fresh in your mind coming out of a session like the one we had, I realized that yes, I was actually very happy with the results of the session. I think you have to remember again that first I look at it from the budget perspective. My responsibility was the budget, to come up with a budget that was as small as we could make it, and yet would not be vetoed by the governor. Now, I'm not particularly concerned about a veto from the governor, with the one exception of that being the budget. Because then that means we go back in special session, which we did last time, and it was not a pleasant scenario. Would not like to go through that again. So the plan was going in to make it as small as we possibly could, cutting government where we could, keeping the growth as tight as possible, and sending a budget to the Senate that the Senate wasn't going to make big changes in. Because the last thing I want to do is end up in a conference committee if the House and the Senate don't agree. Because what happens in the conference committee is you have 6 people who end up deciding what's in that ultimate final budget. And that's not the way I like to do business. I like to make it as clean as I possibly can, coming out of appropriations, coming out of the House, send it to the Senate, having had the Senate involved the entire time, and to some extent, having had the governor's budget director involved the entire time. I like to let the budget director know from day one what the lines that we won't cross. I told him on the first day, in fact, I think it was in December, I told him we will not pass your $100 million worth of tax increases, so we're not going there. And there was a lot of consternation over that, but once they understand you're not going to do it, then it becomes a lot easier to talk to them. The Senate is involved from the beginning, but we're involved in subcommittees. We have subcommittees of the Appropriations Committee that are made up of House and Senate members. So we walk down that path together, but kind of in silos: education, healthcare, natural resources, the crime portion, justice portion. And so what happens is we don't always agree on the entire budget, House and Senate. So it becomes a little bit tricky to make sure that as we're putting the final pieces together, that the Senate is there with us. And we met probably every day with representatives from the Senate to make sure that they knew exactly what we were going to do. We met at least weekly with the governor's budget director, so he knew exactly what we were going to do, so that we could, in the final days, put that budget on the table and not have it changed much from what we had done. So we did, of course, we have to, I think we had one change, we had one substantive change back from the Senate, which was they added back in 5 permanent positions that we had removed. They added those back into the forestry division. Other than that, there were a few technical changes, and that was it. So it passed on through in the final days without going to the conference committee, and then the governor did finally sign it. He wasn't particularly happy with it, but he knew that that was the best he was going to get. That it was the way we had defined it from the beginning, and there wasn't much he was going to be able to change. So one of the biggest issues that he had outside of the $100 million worth of taxes that he wanted, that we said no to initially, we went in and within the first week defined our, and actually this started way back in November before we ever got there, but one of our biggest issues was because we had had the special session during the interim, we had temporarily removed a number of employees, permanent positions that did not get funded. Well, they get automatically funded when you come back in. So our goal was to take those positions out permanently so they could no longer be filled. And our reasoning was there were positions that had been empty for as much as 2 years because of the budget situation that we were in. They didn't have the money to pay for them, therefore they were empty. But they still got the work done. So our mantra the entire time was, we are going to take these out permanently if they've been empty for 2 years, and you will not be able to fill them with people or with money. So we ended up taking about, I think it was 230 some. A little bit of that changed along the way. Even after the ones that were put back, we permanently took out 200 positions from staffing. The hardest hit was Health Human Services, partly because they are the biggest organization, but partly because they have a lot of empty positions that they have held for quite some time for various reasons, and we said, no, we're taking those out so that they can't be funded. We also took out a couple of the more expensive programs that we decided would not be filled again. One was the one-time only funding for the preschool program that we did in 2017. It was a last-minute thing that was added in. And we made sure that that one went away, so a couple of the more expensive programs were removed. All in attempting to cut the size of government. We left the smallest ending fund balance that we could. We did a study a couple of years ago to look at what does the government really need in the state to cash flow so that they don't have to borrow and that he can cover the expenses, because they were holding a $300 million ending fund balance for quite some time, and we always thought that was high, and yet we didn't have anything to base it on. It was just our feeling that it was high. So we did a study on that and decided that about once every 10 years they went above the $200 million mark. So we said, okay, $200 million is enough. And that was when in 2017 we created the rainy day fund where any excess above that 200 million goes. So it's available in case of emergency, but it's not available without very specific rules on how it can be used, when it can be used, and how it has to be paid back. So that's what we call our true rainy day fund. And actually, in putting that in place in 2017, our bond rating went up quite a bit as a result, because it was a true rainy day fund. So we continued that one. $200 million, anything above that will go into the rainy day fund, and that'll happen end of the fiscal year, which is end of June. And then in addition to that, we put a new fiscal framework in place for infrastructure. One of the fights we've had ever since I got there is infrastructure, in terms of what we're going to fund and what we're not. But the big fight ends up being not about what you're going to fund, but how you're going to pay for it. So we've got a group of people that say, well, I'm never paying for anything with bonds. And another group of people that says, well, I'm not going to use our cash for that. So you have trouble separating what you want to fund from how you're going to fund it. So our attempt was to make sure that that doesn't happen, that there is what we call a working rainy day fund that pays for infrastructure during the good times when you can afford it, and that goes into the budget stabilization reserve fund in the bad economic times, so that you stop paying for infrastructure when the economy's down, and then you pay for it when the economy is up. So we built that framework, got that approved, and I think that is going to be probably the single biggest thing that we accomplished this session, that will be an ongoing, lasting fiscal policy change. So through all of that, the budget went up. How much, would you guess, between the last biennium and this one? Any guesses? Because I know there's a number that's been thrown around, which is 100% false. The number that's being thrown around is 10%, which is absolutely not true. The budget went up 4% over the 2-year biennium period. 4%. Against inflation population growth running about 6%. It's the lowest that we have been able to do since I've been there. So very, very pleased with that. Not very happy about the 10% number that's being thrown around. So if you hear that one, just know that is not the case. So just quickly, one other success, and I want to make sure that we have a lot of questions here, so I will keep talking, because you know me, I could talk for a long time. But another success that I want to talk about is Medicaid expansion. The Medicaid Reform and Integrity Act. Nearly every legislator went into this session knowing that we were going to pass some form of Medicaid expansion. And they will tell you. The question was how much reform we could get into a Republican bill that would be accepted by the federal government. Because anything that we do here in this state has to be approved at the federal government level, because it's all based on a waiver system. So the question is, how much reform can we get in and still get it past the federal government? As you know, one of my big hopes was that in the 2016 timeframe, we were going to see huge changes in Obamacare because they've been promising that since Obamacare went in place. They were going to repeal it and replace it with something that would work for the people of the U.S. And what we got was virtually nothing. Anything we did get was from President Trump. He put some things in place, plus a new director of the Centers for Medicaid Services that actually gave us some relief on some things and the ability to finally put some reform, real reform, into the program. There's some handouts that I passed out. I'm not going to go over them. I passed them out early because I wanted to make sure you had a chance to read them, hoping that they would prompt some questions. Also, the facts are on there so that as you're sitting and hearing people talking about all the things it does or does not do, those are the facts. So hopefully that'll prompt some questions in a little bit. But Trump did give us a lot more latitude on things that we could implement, like work requirements and asset tests, fraud and abuse reforms, not just for expanded Medicaid, but for all Medicaid, the traditional Medicaid that's been in place for years. Residency verification that says you have to live in Montana or you do not get benefits. We could not have done that without the things that Trump put in place. Now here's though an interesting fact that you probably have not heard yet, and I guarantee you won't see it on Facebook. We had two versions of Medicaid expansion. There was a third being drafted that we never saw, but we had two versions of expanded Medicaid. We had the Democrat version that was the same version that was put in place in 2015. It was the same version that was in I-185, the referendum that was on the ballot. We had a Republican version that had in it the work requirements, the asset test, the fraud and abuse reforms, and a lot more, the 15 things that I listed on the page. Of the 100 House members, 100 members in the House, how many would you guess did not vote for one of the two versions, the Democrat version or the Republican version? How many would you guess voted for none of the above? 8. 8.
0.
8.
Did you say 8?
8.
Only 8?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Not 80.
And how many of those 8 were from Ravalli County? 0. 0. Just be clear, because I know you're hearing different things out there. The Democrat version, 27 Republicans voted for it. They voted to bring it to the floor. The Republican version, 19 Republicans voted for it. So just be clear. When people are out slamming the ones who put the best Medicaid program in place that they could, they voted for a version that they said was better, that had no reforms in it whatsoever. So I think it's important that people know that, because the things I see on Facebook have nothing to do with this. Fortunately, the one that passed was the one that had the reforms in it. And that's on the yellow sheet that you have in front of you, the 15 things that I listed. Those are the major reforms that are in that bill. And then just real quickly, I'm not going to touch on these at all, but you may want to ask questions about them. Really exciting changes in education that Dave's going to talk about. Dave was on the Appropriations Committee, by the way. We snagged him early and got him put on the Appropriations Committee, and he was an outstanding member of the committee. Ravalli County taking the lead in veterans bills, which also was Dave's, and hopefully he'll spend a few minutes on that. The new infrastructure policy, if you have questions on that, we'd love to talk about it more. Economic development programs, we did a lot of work on those that will benefit Ravalli County specifically. New timber harvesting and restoration programs that lets counties set up agreements directly with the federal government. That's going to be huge. We put money into that, and we're going to, yeah, Keith's nodding his head. He knows all about that one, the Good Neighbor Authority. certified hemp program, which I don't know how many people are excited about it, but if you are buying any stocks today and you're not buying hemp stocks, you're missing out. Although a lot of financial brokers won't sell them to you because they still think they're a restricted product and they qualify them under marijuana products. So, but I think we're going to see some exciting things start happening with people who are using hemp for various things. Crime legislation, missing persons, drug interdiction teams that would love to talk about some more. 3 things that didn't pass that should have that I'd love to have you ask about later. The referendum asking voters directly to ban sanctuary cities in the state of Montana, that did not pass. Republicans did not vote for that bill.
Did they say why?